Admiral Mark Montgomery has been on the road again, along with Craig Singleton and Matt Pottinger. All three are FDD scholars, and with apologies to Willie Nelson, I'll just say they're the best of friends, insisting that the world keep turning our way. And this road trip was to Japan and Taiwan, two American allies increasingly threatened by Xi Jinping, the very ambitious Chinese communist ruler. I'm Cliff May, and this will be my debrief on the FDD mission. It will also be your debrief right here on Foreign Policy. So good to see you back from your travels, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Thanks for having me, Cliff. I thought when you said Willie Nelson, you're going to start singing On the Road again.
That's what I was singing, On the Road. Best of friends, insisting that the world keep turning our way. That's the lyric from the song. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right,
you know, I want to tee this up a bit because regular listeners, those familiar with FDD's work, will know what I'm about to say, but we may have some listeners who are new. And right now, there are four most endangered democracies. Ukraine is fighting an entirely defensive war against Russia, which is ruled by Vladimir Putin, who I call on a new column for the Washington Times, Vladimir the Terrible, like Ivan the Terrible or Ivan the Terrible. Ivan is the right pronunciation. He's the new model czar. Among other things, I explain why Melania Trump has not been tagged along or strung along or otherwise fooled by Putin, as too many people are. Israel's an endangered democracy, one at war on multiple fronts. What had seemed to be its weakest enemy, Hamas, in Gaza, has turned out to present the most challenges, largely because Hamas considers a high death toll among Gazan civilians not a tragedy, but a strategy. The more martyrs, the better, because Israel will get most of the blame, even though Hamas has ruled Gaza since 2007 and claims to still be in charge, but with no responsibility for the welfare of its subjects. Third is South Korea. Listeners should understand that the Korean War never ended. It's just been frozen since 1953. And Kim Jong-un, in exchange for assisting Putin, is receiving assistance from Putin that could help him defrost the conflict and or more effectively target Japan and U.S. outposts in the Pacific. And finally, there's Taiwan, free, prosperous, a democratic society of huge importance to the world economic order. Xi wants the Taiwanese to surrender their freedom and become his subjects and his assets. So where to start? Did you go to Japan first before you went to Taiwan?
We did. Craig and I went to Japan.
Craig and you went, okay. And what did you hear there? What did you tell them? What did they tell you?
So it was a really good meeting, series of meetings that Craig and I set up using each of our different kind of contacts there. And
so Craig is head of our China program. Yep. Just so we know, a senior fellow. Go ahead, yeah.
And a career U.S. official.
Formerly a career U.S. official in sensitive positions.
Yeah. And so what we spoke with the former Minister of Defense and I think future Minister of Defense, Minister Kona, and I thought had a very good discussion of what the Japanese have an interesting issue. They're increasing their defense budget significantly. The exact percentage is really hard to pin down because part of it was uncovering what they're really spending before when they said they were only spending 1%. They're spending slightly more. But they've definitely increased their spending a lot because of the invasion of Ukraine.
That's interesting.
That is the only reason.
Because that kind of was like a wake-up call for them?
It was a wake-up call. And they are... and they're spending an extra, they already spent about 55, 60 billion a year. And by the way, very effectively, second only to Israel. Now I look at all these countries, I study 50 or 60 of them reasonably closely. Two countries stand out as maximum efficiency in their spending. Number one, Israel. Number two, Japan. And so Japan's now increasing it dramatically. That actually puts at risk that whole efficiency idea when you start to spend money fast, money you didn't have the years before, you have to be very careful.
I tell my wife that all the time.
It was, the minister was asking a lot of really good questions, particularly me, of like, what's the value of this weapon system? What's this? And just, a good back and forth on how to do it. As you know, I was assigned there for 5 years and then lived there a couple of years as a child. So I got a reasonable understanding of the Japanese challenge. And so we did, that was a very good meeting, actually series of meetings. And then additionally, we met with the Office of the National Cyber Director, a newly stood up office there, one based heavily on legislation Samantha Ravitch and I were largely responsible for here in the States.
Samantha also here at FDD, just so we know. Yep.
and so and then specifically in Japan, I'd gone over there and encouraged this and pushed it, and they created this office. And so I met with the inaugural leader. He's already making a big difference in organizing how their government protects their critical industries from the kind of rapacious Chinese cyber attacks.
And how about North Korean cyber attacks?
They see some from North Korea.
Yeah.
North Korea is more about criminal activity. It's about theft and Bitcoin. I mean, look, let's be clear. North Korea's whole cyber thing. We assess them as a cyber gang masquerading as a nation state, right?
Right.
I mean, a cyber criminal group, and they steal. They conduct malicious cyber activity, Bitcoin theft, other things in order to largely finance their ballistic missile and nuclear programs, which require a lot of cash. And so, they're there.
But I'm just reminded they also hit Sony Pictures.
That's right.
Because Sony put out a movie with Seth Rogen, I think it was. Rogen, yeah, where the villain was North Korean, right. And they didn't like that. So, of course, like Sony, $100 million. And by the way, I doubt Hollywood will make, they'll go back to, white villains with British accents, which is what, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously China is never the villain. I mean, that would go without saying. And then North Korea is the second one in there. Although historically, if you think about, Wolverines and the movies that were made in the 1980s and 90s, the villain was always like either North Korea or Cuba, like invading the United States. You're always like really put off.
I'm recently watching some series called Countdown, and the villains are Belarusians, which is Belarusians of all things, right?
Why not?
Okay.
So, and then we visited with their National Security Council to get a feeling, kind of a temperature on how aggressive or not aggressive they would be in supporting the kind of tabletop we were going to run in Taiwan on.
And just so what a tabletop is, so it's a kind of war game.
Yeah, it's a war game, but usually, often no actual. You don't simulate the attacks. It can study issues short of war pretty well, and
it's about decision making, right?
Yeah, it's exactly. And so we wanted to get an idea. Hey, we were going to have Japanese players in the game, and we did. But separate from that, Craig and I just want to have an idea. What would the Japanese really do? And that would influence how Craig played China. And he played Chairman
when you
G
did
in
war
game,
games in Taiwan.
Yeah. That was very useful. And so these, we did a few other meetings. We met their FEMA, because their FEMA has some cyber things in it. And I wanted, and he was an old friend of mine, a Japanese officer, and a few other meetings like that. And then I had the pleasure on one of the weekend days of going down and seeing my son, who's on a destroyer.
Right.
In Japan on the USS Howard.
How great.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And still loving life. He's a junior officer. He doesn't know better. So a lot of fun and good visit. And then and also got us prepped. It was good because Craig's playing China. I'm moderating the game. It's kind of important that we don't have jet lag. So we showed up in Taiwan, reasonably rested. And then began the events there.
Okay, so let's talk about Taiwan. And to preface, I think it's important to say why. Just remind people, or people know, why it's of such important strategic value to the U.S.
Well, I look at it in two ways. One that I think everyone understands, and another that probably only a globalist would understand. So the one everyone understands, it is critical to U.S. national security because of an economic productivity, because we are not building. The things that America assembles, puts together, and sales that make us a lot of money, they almost invariably involve logic chips that come from Taiwan and memory chips that come from Korea. And of the two of them, the one that's very hard to replicate and rebuild rapidly would be this logic chips, infrastructure ecosystem that exists in Taiwan. I know the president on occasion says Taiwan stole the big company involved in this, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. Let's be clear. There's a book written on this, Chip Wars. You can go read it.
Chris Miller. Really good book.
Pretty clearly demonstrates they did not steal it.
No.
We fumbled the ball and they picked it up.
Yeah, Texas Instruments, in
TI
particular.
folded,
Yeah.
And look, I think historically we made him say Morris Chang's an American citizen.
Yeah.
He would have been.
He's the one who did it. There
Yeah.
was a Texas Instruments. They didn't give him the job. He had this idea. No one wanted to invest in it. All these great venture capitalists. He went to Taiwan. The Taiwanese government said,
Yeah.
"Well, this sounds good. Okay, we'll do it.
We're in.
We're in."
And thank God they're on our side.
Yeah,
Because
well,
what they produce are the best things in the world, and so
most sophisticated, highest end chips.
But they have another company called UMC, just a step behind it. That's kind of more though. They're the AAA team. They're the workhorse. They produce a lot of chips, but of the larger, the 20 to 150 nanometer size chips. Not as sophisticated, but they power so many of our weapon systems and so many of our our F-150s and our washing machines and everything else that uses these microchips. So let's be clear: they have a couple companies and big companies in here, and thousands of subsidiaries that provide and secondary and tertiary supply chain companies that keep that whole ecosystem going. We saw some incredible numbers that I would say my gut reaction is just the semiconductor manufacturing, TSMC and UMC is probably 18% of the grid on a day-to-day basis in Taiwan, or 18% of the industrial portion of the grid. I mean, it's a big chunk of power, that every day. So just to give you an idea, there's nothing like that in the United States. We don't say the automobile manufacturing is 10 or 20% of the grid in America. It's 0.1% or something like that. It's just scale-wise, it dominates the industry and the ecosystem of Taiwan. So the number one reason is we need access to that. Yeah. We need to have a level playing field. We need a zero tariff deal with that stuff. So if we were smart, semiconductors would be at a very low level. And I think the rumored TSMC purchase of 49% of Intel that's going down this week and next week is probably a lot about keeping those tariffs low, because we need this stuff to come in tariff free.
And a couple other points I want to add. One is, people say, why can't we do this ourselves? And Trump, I would like to do this ourselves. And even Biden wanted to do it. And it's not, from my understanding, I'm not a great expert, about much, but it's not so easy for us to replicate what they've done in Taiwan. It's not impossible, but it's not happening in the next 5 or 10 years, right?
And not for $10 or $15 billion. So we did the CHIPS Act for $52 billion.
Yeah.
And there was, supposedly leveraged $300 billion in the private sector. I don't know those exact numbers. I'll just say, I can't stipulate to those exact numbers. What I'll say is, that probably solved 5% of the problem, right? So if you want to solve 100% of the problem, multiply 50 times 20, and you end up with $1 trillion. If you have $1 trillion laying around, Cliff, then I think we can, solve this problem, like you said, over 10. And even then, that's a 10 or 15-year solution. And then finally, I would say, just getting the STEM workforce to do the CHIPS Act has been a gargantuan challenge that we are failing at. And then, of course, just to complicate things, the Taiwanese, TSMC said, well, look, we'll bring over 3,000 or so mentors to get your people up to speed. And then we gave them a visa, heartache about it. You just can't make this stuff up in our country. And in fact, the money...
And the mentors only speak Mandarin anyhow.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. But who?
So TSMC did these kind of investments in the U.S., Japan, and Germany.
Right.
So the investment started a year later, and it's a year farther along than ours. In other words, they've been processing bureaucracy 2 years faster than this. And I'll just say that when I'm told that the Japanese bureaucracy was twice as efficient as ours, our bureaucracy is effed, as they say, because Japan is not known as a bureaucratically smooth and agile country, and they're kicking our butt. So this is, yes, Cliff, it's not replaceable, and it's a problem.
All right. And there's one other point I want to make. It's not an economic point. It's a national security point. And I'll give a shout out to Miles Yu, who's a China expert. Like me, writes in the Washington Times about China. I had a piece on Tuesday that I recommended people read. He's also at the Hudson Institute. And he wrote that for Xi Jinping, Taiwan is the lost island, a defiant symbol of freedom that must be subdued for the communist world order to be complete. Beneath this ideological drive lies a nakedly geopolitical ambition, the destruction of U.S. global leadership. not making America great again. And he mentions, of course, of TSMC, which is the crown jewel of global semiconductor production, and how important it is to the democratic world. Two more. Taiwan is living, breathing proof that a free, democratic, ethnically Chinese society can thrive without communist rule. Xi Jinping doesn't like that. And the survival of a democratic Taiwan is the greatest subversion that the CCP cannot tolerate. It's not that different from Putin looking at Ukraine and saying, here next to me is a free and democratic society. I don't want that. I can't have that. I can't abide that.
Well, I'm with you. I said there was one issue, the TSMC, the economic one. The second one is, I would say, I'm an unrepentant globalist. I believe it is the United States' responsibility to look around the world and see countries like us.
Can I say you're not? There's two ways to look at globalism, and I think you're an internationalist, not a globalist, because I think when people talk about globalism, it means like the UN is the world government, and you're not in favor of that, and I'm not in favor of that. What you are saying is, if you want to make America great again, America has to be the leader of a free world that is competitive with the authoritarian world. And so you can define that as globalism, but I wouldn't. And there's also a difference, digressing a bit, between globalism and globalization. Globalization means things made in Taiwan, we need. Things we make here, they need. That's globalization. Again, globalism is all these NGOs and the UN, which is so corrupt. I mean, just unreformably corrupt. I didn't always believe that. Yeah. I do now. That we're not in favor of. So I just want to defend you here.
But I also say that I don't acknowledge the UN hijacking my term, globalist. But yeah, fair enough.
Yes,
okay, I'll go internationalist,
okay.
And I'll just say, as an unrepentant internationalist, I believe, I spent 35 years in the military, believing, and to get it, the United States, it's not just, it is, we're the leader of the free world so that we benefit from the free world.
Yes.
We keep these trade routes open. In the Constitution, it says we'll maintain a Navy and raise an Army. The reason we'll maintain a Navy is so that we can go around and make sure that there's a fair, an open market for the United States to trade in, and we felt that since 1781 or 1789.
Right.
That is what we, in our core, what we believe.
Right.
And then part of that is, look, when we recognize a country as in our image, democratic, free trade, rule of law, transparent, like Taiwan. Like what Ukraine aspires to be, they're not there, but they're aspiring to that. Like South Korea. South Korea just had an ugly incident by a leader, and he was tossed out of power.
True.
Impeached, convicted and tossed out of power, and a new election tossed his whole party out for it. That's democracy speaking. Those are the countries. Israel. Those are countries I can get behind.
Right. They want to be part of a free world and an American-led free world. Let's make that clear. Okay, that's making America great again.
So that, to me, that's why I support, why I have a lot of time for Taiwan.
Got it. Okay, very good. Okay, so you did a war game there, a tabletop exercise. You met with President Lai Ching-te and with Vice President Xiao Bin-kim, who I met last year when I was there with you. Just give us some of the highlights of what you heard from them, what you told them, whatever you feel is interesting.
So I'll do the tabletop first, then kind of talk about Taiwan second. So the tabletop, we went there and said, hey, we have a premise here of cyber-enabled economic warfare. We believe China is practicing cyber-enabled economic warfare against Taiwan. And what that means is that they're across three critical infrastructures, financial, energy, and communications, conducting a series of political, economic, diplomatic, and then cyber and influence operations attacks. So what's that mean? Well, economic one might be in the energy realm. I'm going to cut off, I'm going to influence Qatar to cut back on LNG shipments to Taiwan. And political, it might be, stopping support for Taiwan at some international organization. Those are kind of light at this point. But they could do other ones like financial. They can cut off remittance payments or bank exchanges and really put the Taiwan financial system in extremis, as you and I saw in a war game last year.
Yeah.
Or tabletop last year.
Yeah.
And some of the ones like dropping an anchor on a submarine cable. Amazingly, we see that. And then the cyber ones, we're starting to hear about these malicious attacks and the influence operations nonstop. And then you feint military things like missile closure areas. Some of the other political ones would be an administrative action to stop LNG movement of ships towards Taiwan. And so that's what we played in this game. And I should preface that Taiwan has a magnificently hard energy problem, and that's that LNG being 50% of the grid. Coal's 45%, renewables are 5%.
No nuclear.
Nuclear used to be 20%, and then it got down to 10, and then it got down to 5.
Why?
And now they've shut down their 3 big nuclear facilities, which was 6 reactors over the last decade.
For global warming reasons?
I think, and also safety associated with after the Fukushima event, they overreacted. And I got to be honest, it's the party in control now, the DPP, one that otherwise we tend to agree with. The DPP is this weird party that's got 2 anchors to it. Bernie Sanders and Mitch McConnell, right? I mean, it's got a very, it's got a very kind of progressive energy, clean, anti-nuclear part, and then it's got a fighting China part to it. It's a kind of unique thing. It works for them, but it's given them this conundrum that they got rid of nuclear power. Okay. So, and some of these plants can be recovered. They're shut down, but they could be with some time and refueling started back up. All right. So we conduct the game, and the CCP was really the Chinese Communist Party. Oh, the LNG, it comes 40% from Australia. That's cool. 30% from Qatar. You've heard my version of Qatar.
Yeah.
Irredentist, transactional country that I don't trust. 10% from the United States, a trusting country, and about 20% from everywhere, open market, kind of different markets. In the game, China played, as usual, pretty smoothly by Craig Singleton, was able to bring lots of pressure on Taiwan, but in a way that didn't provoke a U.S. support. And part of it was cutting off Qatar shipping. Another one was stopping LNG ships coming. And Taiwan has so little LNG stowage, they get 1 LNG ship a day, effectively, about 350 a year. If China can block 10 straight ships, just tie them up, bureaucratic harassment outside of Taiwan's waters where, using the Chinese Navy as protection, they run out of LNG in Taiwan, and their grid goes from 100% available to 50% available overnight. Plus any maintenance going on in the coal plants, that's the other thing, then they're down to 45%. And that's likely to have maintenance going on. So you're going to be around 45%. You're going to have to start cutting off power to either hospitals and schools or TSMC and UMC and the semiconductor manufacturing equipment. That's going to be a challenging problem, vexing problem for the Taiwan government. And so we've got to prevent that from happening.
And if they were to do that, they would do that and say, here's what we insist on. And here are the ways we insist that you compromise your sovereignty. Is that the idea?
So the whole idea is China does this, puts a maximum pressure campaign on to the point where the President Lai or his successor calls over and says, hey, let's talk. And the minute you do that with the Chinese, it's like telling Putin, let's talk.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get down a rabbit hole from which you wish you could never, which you'll never come back. So I'm very worried about this. I would say on the versus, I did the financial one. I thought there was issues, but they were ones that afterwards I was like addressable. You kind of go through the list and addressable, and not with like superhuman effort by the Taiwanese or the United States or the Japanese, the kind of 3 big countries that got tasking last year and ours. This year was different. This year, my big takeaways were the United States is going to have to step in early, which is hard for a democracy in the middle of a gray zone kind of thing, to deduce the risk happening, cut through all the fog, and step in. I've worked in a lot of White Houses or alongside a lot of White Houses. That is, I'm not describing the normal modus vivendi, right? So we had to step in early and decide that we're going to escort. It's a big deal. U.S. Navy ships are going to come in, grab the LNG ships around Singapore, and escort them up. This is a big move. As Doge would say, it's a big balls move, right? You've got to go grab those, and this is introducing a real strategic dilemma for China. If they do this, they block the ships, and then we escort. Now they've got to block a U.S. Navy ship, sink a U.S. Navy ship, damage a U.S. Navy ship, something to a U.S. Navy ship to stop this escort from happening. And the turnover to the Taiwan Navy at like the 12-mile point, and then the Taiwan Navy escorts it into the pier. So we've made a conundrum for Xi. To me, that was the one good move we had against Craig and his China team in the game. That's a tough one they're going to have to do escalation, significant escalatory action.
And your theory has long been that even though people talk about Beijing taking over Taiwan with, amphibious landings and missiles, it's more likely that they use all these other non-military measures. And what you're also describing here is where it would sort of meld into a military conflict. And they may not want that if they can do this another way, if they can do this, more Sun Tzu, in other words, take over without fighting.
You're right. I should have mentioned this is the most likely scenario.
Not the most dramatic and dangerous, but the most likely. Yeah,
right. I'm glad you mentioned that. And so, but look, do we practice this? No, never. Do we work with the Taiwans? No, we're still, despite the fact that with significant FDD push, including writing sections of it by Craig Singleton and I, the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act of 2023, which is in the National Defense Authorization Act, directed the Department of Defense to really aggressively work these training and exercising with the Taiwan Navy and Air Force. It hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Neither the Biden nor Trump administrations have been aggressive in doing this for fear of provoking China.
Right.
Well, here's the problem. We see this with Putin. Remember with Biden, I'm going to give him, maybe I'll give him M1s, maybe I won't, it might provoke him. I'll give him F-16s, I won't, maybe I'll give him ATACMS, maybe I won't, it might provoke Putin. And then I'll limit how you can use these things because I don't want to provoke Putin. All we did was...
That's what Biden did.
Yeah, that's what Biden did.
That's what we're hoping Trump doesn't do.
Yeah.
And we're urging that he doesn't, but we don't know. Yeah.
And in either case, you just can't... This is what Brad Bowman, the director of our Center on Military and Political Power here, says is the provocation principle.
Yeah.
When you are more concerned about the provocation you might cause an enemy. And let's dial this up.
Then your enemy is about provoking you. Who deters whom?
And we self-deter.
And we had a good example of this with where Trump did the right thing just recently, and I'll just recount it quickly, which is that Dmitry Medvedev, the former president, who is, as I've said on a number of occasions, both the lapdog and the attack dog of Putin, starts threatening the U.S., saying, Putin could just use nuclear weapons, not against Ukraine, but against you Americans. What do you think about that? And then Trump said, well, I'm going to reposition some nuclear subs, which is saying, you don't intimidate me, guy. And then they backed off from that. But by the way, as we're recording this, the deadline of August 8th, which is when Trump said that Putin had to have a ceasefire or he'd get some real pressure, I suspect may be delayed because Witkoff had what is being called a good meeting with Putin. A good meeting with Putin always worries me. I'm not saying too much vodka. I'm saying too much Putin disingenuousness. And anyhow, he's tagging along. Okay, go ahead.
So
anyway,
completely. In this, so we absolutely have to begin exercising with them, working with them, getting the Taiwans up their interoperability scale with us, so that we can do these kind of events together. You can't just, after you don't work with a country for 50 years, we walked away cold turkey in 1979. With the Taiwan Relations Act from exercising with the Taiwans. You don't get to show back up in 2025 or 2026 and say, how's it going? I mean, you need to do lots of work, lots of training and testing and constant iterative exercising. And then you're ready to kind of move from deconflicted to coordinated.
Yeah.
And then another couple of years of training and you can get to that integrated where we need to be to fight China together. China looks at us and says, I don't think the two of you are really there. I look at you and you're 2 + 2 = 3, not 2 + 2 = 4, 2 + 2 = 5, which is where we are with the Japanese and the UK and other great partners.
And this concerns me that Trump is now eager to meet with Xi Jinping. He wants to cut a trade deal. And what I wonder is, will Taiwan be part of that discussion, and in what way? And I just mentioned one other thing before I let you. There are reports that President Lai was denied a request that he made to transfer through the U.S. for a visit I think he was going to make to Latin America. And that's because of Chinese pressure saying, don't let him come into the U.S., and which raises the question, is Taiwan a bargaining chip in negotiations with Xi? And if so, how does that come out?
I don't know if Taiwan's a bargaining chip as much as it is a we're not going to let you provoke this either. So, let me just wrap up the game thing and say two quick thoughts. One, I think about this all the time because of my son, but other reasons. We're willing to sacrifice 7,000 to 30,000 Americans in that most dangerous scenario. That's our entering argument. We're willing to sacrifice. Every war game I play has those kind of numbers in it. We're willing to sacrifice that many Americans to keep Taiwan free. And I sign up for that. But then you tell me we're not going to train and exercise with that key partner for fear of provoking China? Make your mind up. And by the way, this is Clinton, George W., Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. Everyone has signed up for this crazy conundrum, and we got to break that.
I remember Biden said it's always been strategic ambiguity. I'm not crazy about that, but I understand it. Biden actually said whether he was
said it 4 times.
4 times we're going to defend them. Well, as you're saying, if you're going to defend them, how about training so you defend them well rather than badly?
There's 2 countries in the world where the United States will not send active duty generals and admirals to work with our ally. One is Ukraine, and the other is Taiwan. I mean, you can't make this up. That's why retirees like myself and a few others go to Ukraine. That's why I, as a retiree, go to Taiwan. I mean, honestly, this is why I think FCD lets me do it. This is how you help a beleaguered democracy when your country's not smart enough to help it on its own sometimes. All right.
Okay.
So the game went really well in the terms of, it didn't go well for the Taiwans. It went well. As usual, Craig played it really well. I got to tell you, Matt Pottinger is a gift. He's fantastic. We all know he's a former deputy national security advisor.
Former deputy, and there's so much you can say about Matt. He speaks fluent Mandarin and more responsible than anybody else for the foreign policy community, understanding that the Chinese Communist Party does not want amicable relations with the U.S., does not want to normalize it, that it's ambitious and wants to defeat us and take over the global world order and make us a has-been superpower. I think it's
a fair statement.
Okay, I try to summarize it.
He played Donald Trump in the game. He played the leader of the U.S. team. He took your role, and he played it well, and including tweets that he sent, which we'll put in the final report, that ended with "Thank you for your attention to this matter." It was just hilarious.
That's great.
And the Taiwans were impressed, doing this, but he was blunt in a way. He knows President Trump pretty well.
Yes,
and so really good. So it's a good game. We're gonna have 2 reports coming out. One is a report we're doing separately on convoy ops and reflagging, the history of it, and how it applies to the Taiwan. I think, and I have a Royal Navy friend, a U.S. Navy friend who's now in a congressional committee, but he wrote this before he went there, and then an expert on LNG and shipping, that kind of stuff. So we really got experts writing this paper. The hardest part, Annie Fixer, the deputy director at the CCI, is trying to get together 4 discombobulated minds and get it into one good paper. We'll get that out. The second one is a summary of this, and here Craig and I, and then Jack Burnham and Joe Yang, who went with us, the 4 of us, have put together a paper on what we learned at this game. Things for Taiwan to do, things for the U.S. to do, and things for Japan, Australia, who were at the game and played to do. Similar to what you and I did last year with the financiers. So I'm really excited. So in that part, Tabletop was successful. It was the second of 3. We're going to do one on communications next year. That'll wrap it up. And on this part of our support to Taiwan, because I just think this is the right thing to do. And as you know, we do this at FDD kind of out of our pocket because we just think it needs to get done. And the U.S. government would, in any normal relationship, the U.S. government would do this and say, "Please stay out of our way." But in this relationship, there's no U.S. government to tell us to stay out of the way. Just for a lot of reasons, that's where we are for now. But you asked about seeing President Lai and Vice President B. Kim. So first, again, going with Matt, I think that they like me and they like Craig.
Yeah.
They love Matt. It was really interesting, but we had good meetings with President Lai, good meetings with B. Kim, and they're extremely, especially the Vice President, has an extreme questioning attitude, which you saw last year. She did it again, like every
Smart
statement.
woman, of course. We should have been with perfect English. She went to college and graduate school here,
and she was their ambassador here for 3 years.
And she was the ambassador,
Anything Matt, Craig, or I said, she questioned, and we proved, I think, and she'd go, okay, got it, and she'd move on. Our Taiwan teammates in this, the DSET think tank, she went after them as well, but in a professional way, but got the answer she wanted. She's collecting data. She definitely thinks a lot about the communications issue and is expecting big things from that. Again, we're doing that of our own accord, but I think she'll be pleased with it that we do it. And just really, and then those were good meetings. And then, but before the game, we went for separate reasons. We went with the Minister of Defense, National Security Advisor team, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and separately, I went and we met with the AITR team there. And then separately, I went and spent a day.
Which team is this?
AIT, American Institute in Taiwan, our embassy.
Yeah.
And then and those were good meetings. Those meetings were really about how do we talk about the 3% defense production? How do they get to 4? How do they get to 5? The challenges with FMS, the challenges with the trade agreement they have, the challenges with China. And this gets at what you said. I think that until we have a set date for the for the summit between Xi and Trump, there will be nothing on Taiwan.
Yeah,
so that visit isn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. It was canceled. But more importantly, like FMS, foreign military sales packages won't come through. Presidential drawdown authority packages won't come through. Nothing that could disrupt scheduling that. After it's scheduled, they'll look at things. Some things will make the cut. And then once the summit's over, then everything else will flow. So, look, I don't believe in this kind of diplomatic drive. We allow China to profess angst at anything we do with Taiwan, and therefore we won't do it. And it drives our policy. We're letting that happen. They don't give us any of the same discretion, with how they act, the Chinese. But I think that all these things will happen, but they'll happen after the probably APEC meeting, when I think on the sideline there'll be a Xi-Trump summit. Okay. Then our other meetings were interesting. They were with I went and hung out with their chairman, Admiral May, who was my counterpart for years.
Admiral May, maybe it's a relative of mine.
Yeah, with an I. Yeah, and so good man, and he said, "Why don't you come meet with me?" And I said, "I'll have a staff there." I didn't realize he was going to have the joint staff, so it was the J2, J3, J5. And I sat there with a couple hours where back and forth on questions. I'm pretty aggressive in my discussions with them because I get it once every 3 months or once every 5 months. I want to make the points, and there's a lot of things I think they need to get done, and they don't get this conversation from American Department of Defense and military officials, and they really need.
Yeah.
They're fantastic. I think that, of their own accord, they're making all the right decisions, but I just, was able to validate some of their thinking on it and explain probably the best way to describe this to the United States. But they're working really. This is a country. People say, is Taiwan going to fight? Yes, Taiwan's going to fight. Now, look, they're fighting a country 22 times bigger than, Ukraine's fighting a country probably 4 times bigger than it in GDP. This is 22 times bigger than it in GDP. They're not going to fight and win alone. One of the things I've been saying publicly is this big, huge exercise they do called Hong Kong. It was 2025 or number 41. It's a beautiful. I love it. They're doing live fire. They're doing integrating the civil defense issue, figuring out how to have reservists called up. All that. That's fantastic. But in the end, it needs to be bilateral. The U.S. needs to be there. They're not fighting China alone. That's not a fight. That's a butt kicking.
Is Japan in this fight as well?
Well, so that's a great question. So I think if you privately ask the Japanese prime minister, he would say something very close to this. An invasion of Taiwan, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan or coercive act against Taiwan is an existential threat to Japan.
Right.
They have to take some action. The lowest level of action is allow us to use Japan as a base, and I think they'll allow us to do that. That's important. At some point, though, and frankly, I could utilize that as a war planner, run so much stuff out of Japan that eventually China goes, screw it, we're hitting Japan. We can't have the world's largest aircraft carrier smacking us every morning or every evening, which is what I'd be doing. So then they're in it. If China attacks Japan, they'll be all in it. the real question is, will Japan of its own accord enter? That's harder to,
Okay.
I would say right now, no.
Okay.
And it all depends. It's the how clear China's the rapacious enemy. You know, if it starts with a cross-strait invasion just out of the blue, yes, Japan's going to
right.
support.
But if it starts with cyber attacks,
Exactly.
and just briefly, because we're curious, Australia, are they in this war?
I'd say they're Japan plus 10%. It's not quite an existential threat to them.
Well,
but they're part of the team.
But if
be.
Beijing takes over Asia and it becomes their sphere of influence as part of their global ambitions, they're in big trouble.
I agree with that. And I think the Australians have come to understand that so much over the last 5 years.
Reluctantly.
They have come, yes, to that conclusion. There's still a prime minister or two out there who's wacky, but they generally get it. So, again, basing for the U.S. guaranteed. In the fight, I don't know. They better start saying yes, by the way, because the whole AUKUS is premeditated on, we're giving you submarines.
AUKUS being America, U.S.,
UK,
right.
Alliance that, and one of the big steps of it was that we would give 4 nuclear submarines, powered submarines, to the Australians that they would operate as they help us they invest in our defense industrial base so that we can produce more submarines.
Right.
Long-term good with some short-term pain. Well, if they don't say pretty cleanly, pretty soon, we're in it with you, the rules of engagement for these subs will be like as if they were American. I don't think the Trump administration is going to transfer the 4 submarines to them. And it's always been the question to me. I was hesitant on AUKUS. I went along with it because in the end, you can see the value in it.
Sure.
But there's risk.
Yep.
And the risk is amplified by when the Australians see a president they don't trust, which might be how they see things now. And it's double amplified when the Australians respond by saying, we're not sure we're in it with you.
Right. Because submarines are not that easy to come by.
That's right.
This
is giving up, probably at any one time, we'll be lucky if we have 48 to 50 operational SSNs at the time we're transferring them 4. So we're giving them like 8% of our capacity. We better see that 8% on the front line.
Yeah.
Now, it's in a great location.
Yeah.
It's a 3-day sail or 4-day sail, not a 3-week sail.
Yeah.
I get it. But boy, you boys better be in it to win it with us. Because if you're not, I don't think AUKUS is going to happen. And look, I want it, AUKUS. At this point, AUKUS is, they've done the investment. They've sent money to the United States, the Australians, and to the UK. We need this to happen. And so the Australians have to talk the game, and then Trump has to accept the win.
Okay. Well, a point I want you to make, you've made in the past, is that the Taiwanese understand the importance of Ukraine, unlike some people in this country, including some people, I would say, in the Pentagon, who think, oh, no, we can defend Taiwan, but we need to cede Ukraine to do it. We have to get out of the middle. We can. They understand that the knee bone is connected to the thigh bone.
Yeah. So for certain, China will read a U.S. and European capitulation in Ukraine as a green light to take action in Taiwan.
Right.
And the last thing we want is a green light, because look, we want to deter China, not defeat them. But I revert back to the 7,000 to 30,000 dead. Plus, the defeat is hard. And it means we got to take disruptive action early, challenging decisions early, something we're not good at.
Mm-hmm.
So, the last thing you want to do is give China a green light on this. And look, even if in some, parallel universe, Bridge Colby and the others are right that we should have never gotten in Ukraine, I'll stipulate that for just a moment and say, now that we're in it, you're unfortunately, you now own the same rules. You cannot leave without having that deterrent, that negative deterrent impact on, and that green light for
because it'll be like you've been defeated.
That's right.
Once you start it all, you've been defeated. You have to stay totally out of it. Like you don't even know what's going on there. Kind of actually like we've done with Georgia.
That's right.
I don't think that's great. Just so people understand, in 2008, Putin takes 2 territories away.
This is Soviet Georgia, not Atlanta.
Yeah, formerly Soviet Georgia. Again, it became a independent country, and Putin is meddling and intervening, and he's got a government in Georgia that is very much kowtowing to him, even though most of the population wants to be free and European. He's doing the same in Moldova at this point right now, very heavy on influence operations, all that. There was, I just mentioned this, I should have mentioned it before, but you may have seen, there was an article in the Free Press, which is Barry Weiss's very good publication, by Palmer Luckey, the founder of Anduril Industries. Anduril, thank you. Okay. And what he essentially says is Taiwan and Ukraine need to work together, actually. What he says is that last year, the former Taiwanese President Tsai, noted that both Taiwan and Ukraine are on the front lines of defense against authoritarian expansion. What's happening in Ukraine today could happen in the Pacific tomorrow. And in the face of Xi's imperialism, Taiwan must learn from Ukrainian soldiers holding a line against Russia. Taiwan must adopt an arsenal equipped for a real high-tech deterrence. And he says, finally, forget the arsenal of democracy that won World War II. Xi Jinping is building a war machine for world communism. And there's and just as we need to encourage the kind of innovation that Ukraine has been working on, and it's a great well, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, successfully with drones and learn from that and push for that. They also need to do that in Taiwan, and that they should be able to do it because they're so technologically advanced compared to most countries. I think that's his thesis.
So I accept everything Palmer, like you said. I'd say, he's solid 6 months behind FTD.
Okay.
Which Anduril is not normally that. I have a lot of friends there. We take no money, obviously, from corporate America, but I have a lot of time for Anduril and the work they're doing. Having said that, what we've been doing is kind of like we're a do tank, not a think tank or an article tank. We've been out there. We brought Ukrainian defense tech companies that were in Washington together with TechRo, the Taiwan embassy here. We're trying to figure out how to bring Ukrainian and Taiwan companies together here in the United States. And then eventually supporting, in fact, just this morning, John Hardy, who runs our Russia Center, he and I were on a call with Ukrainian Defense Tech Association to bring them to Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
So we are doing this.
And by the way, you also on this trip had Jacob Nagel, who is who worked on Iron Dome, and he's Israeli, retired brigadier general, senior fellow, I think is his title here at FTD,
and former national security
advisor in Israel. You brought him over also to talk about what Israel
for the second time.
Yeah, for the second time.
And again, that's a third group of defense tech that I think could get in there. Yeah. I'd like to get Ukraine and Taiwan settled, get that, bring Israel in, and then bring U.S. companies in, because in the end, you're going to need U.S. companies to provide the oversight. Many countries, I don't know where Israel sits on this. I don't think they're quite, I think Israel now knows exactly who China is. I think before October 7th.
I think they didn't.
There was some confusion.
Yeah, I think there was.
I think they're there now.
Well, by the way, we at FTD have been talking to the Israelis about their confusion over China for years.
Oh, I felt I felt like I was a nail in that hammer. So I would say that, but it is a big step to start selling stuff to Taiwan, because you will get the full might of the China screw you express, right? Coming in to hammer you. I'm not sure that's what Netanyahu or any leader of Israel would want right now. So we'll see. I think you're going to need U.S. companies to be the cover. Israel Tech partners with a U.S. company. The U.S. company partners with Taiwan. The Prime Minister Netanyahu can go, I have no idea what's happening here. By the way, Ukraine suffers the same thing.
Yeah.
Ukraine is 100% at war with China. China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And I get North Korea, its troops, and 6 million rounds of artillery and Hauser. With Iran, it's thousands of Iranian Shaheeds, followed by building a factory to produce their own Shaheed-type drones in Russia. But China is backstopping Russia economically. They are, 30+% increases in imports and exports since the war started. They're also providing microelectronics for ballistic and cruise missiles that hammer Kiev and Odessa every night. These are the ones that get through, these kind of weapon systems. 100% Ukraine is at war with China, but I still think Ukraine's uncomfortable selling to Taiwan. I think President Zelensky is going to have to get over that, make that decision. But again, if he can't, then a U.S. company works with the Ukraine company, Ukraine company works with the Taiwan company. So there's going to be 3 to 4 countries involved here at a minimum. Ukraine, Taiwan, and the U.S., potentially Israel as well, and then you get all this beautiful adaptive warfare from both Ukraine and Israel, mixed with technological and supply chain expertise from Taiwan, mixed with scaling capability and venture and funding capital and some technology from the United States. This is like a massive peanut butter chocolate Reese's cup. 4 countries could really do good work together. So I'm excited about that. And so I'm fully with Palmer Luckey, and I would say welcome to the team.
And I would just, I mentioned when we started this conversation that there are 4 most endangered democracies. What I didn't say, although I think people who know us know it, those endangered democracies are endangered by an axis of 4 aggressive powers. We call them the axis of aggressors, and that's Beijing, Moscow, Tehran, and Pyongyang. And, by the way, the first Moscow-Pyongyang direct flight in 30 years just begun. There was a time not that long ago when almost everybody saw the dynastic dictatorship in North Korea as kind of crazy and,
a pariah.
You don't want to, be having dinner. And now they're very much, the relations with Russia are expanding, and China supports them. They've always had relations actually with Tehran. Remember, it was the North Koreans who built the Syrian nuclear reactor that the Israelis took out. They're believed to have a lot to have done with the tunnels under Gaza. So they're a menace that punches well beyond their weight in a lot of ways. And of course, through bad diplomacy, they have nuclear weapons, and with Russian help, if not Chinese help, increasingly good intercontinental ballistic missiles to deliver them against the U.S.
That's certainly the number one, like what has Russia given to the others?
Yeah.
I think Iran got and is going to get air defense systems, even though Russia's challenged right now with their own air defense, I think. And they'll give high-performance fighter jets, I think, soon.
And I think the Israelis know how to defeat Russian air defenses. So, it doesn't mean
doesn't mean they won't take them.
And doesn't mean, and the Chinese are giving Tehran stuff
that's right.
too at this point.
And again, I think that the Israelis will take care of that business, but
but
Iran can always dream. And then North Korea is getting space launch technology, which, as you properly stated, is really ICBM launch activity. Which, by the way, the target for that is one of its targets is known as Seattle. The other is known as San Francisco. The United States. So we need to be very careful of this. And then finally, and most concerningly, the Indo-PACOM commander, Admiral Paparo, mentioned recently that there's indications that Russia is passing China submarine quieting technology.
Submarine quieting technology.
Yeah, and that
more stealthy.
Yeah, that is the. To me, that's the kind of like that. Look, the U.S. submarines operate at a certain high level. Beneath us is Russia and the U.K. Well beneath that is China and the others. And if they can close that gap, their home field advantage, their capacity number advantage will eliminate a significant U.S. Undersea warfare advantage that we've gained and maintained for 50 years. So I'm very worried about that. So I'm glad you mentioned that the 4 of them working together. As you know, Brad Bowman, the CMPP director, myself, and Elaine Jasinski, the CEFP, are putting together an axis of aggressors.
Economic Center, essentially.
Yeah, the Economic Center, putting together an axis of aggressors piece with Annie Fixer and Ryan Probst and a few others. It's going to be a high-quality product that really details 1 zillion or 1,000, probably 1,000 levels of interaction on the military, economic, nuclear. I got the nuclear in the cyber influence operations. The military one's going to be thick. And the other 2 will be reasonable gruel.
Yeah.
And I think this will really lay it out.
Got it. Well, glad to have you back. And I know we can't keep you here for long. You're always on the
Yep.
road. But thanks for the debrief. This has been fascinating.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks to FTD for supporting this. And thanks to our donors. I cannot tell you how important it is that we don't take foreign money. We don't take
Yeah.
corporate money. We
Not from the
work,
Taiwan
yeah,
government, not from the
yeah.
you not from maybe.
Not for these groups. We have to, this level of independence allows us to do a lot. It makes it so that Craig and I can go to Congress and Craig's testifying, I think, next month on exactly this issue. I testified 2 months ago on this issue. I think we're chosen because we're seen as, if there's a mistake, it's because Craig wouldn't make one, but if I made a mistake, it's because I'm wrong, not because someone paid me to be wrong. And that's a level of independence you only get at FDD, and you get it because we have a strong donor base that understands the importance of defending these democracies and opposing these autocracies and doing the right thing.
So, every one of you listening to this conversation and listening to Foreign Policy, this is a listener-sponsored podcast. Feel free to send in your checks. And thanks for being with us today on this episode of Foreign Policy.